Well, I'm excited to be here at the Refit Conference with Scott Smithline of Mill. How you doing, Scott?
I'm great. Great.
I have been using a Mill for about a year, and what's funny is my mom saw it. I told her about it, and she's over 80 years old, and she decided she wanted her own, and so she bought a Mill and she uses it every day. I don't know if an 80-year-old retiree is prototypical Mill user or not.
We actually have a pretty broad range of users.
Okay.
Everybody who scratch cooks or makes meals in their home is familiar with this problem of having uneaten and inedible food. Who cooks can benefit from having a meal.
So, speaking of who the typical Mill user is it, can you explain who the typical Mill user is? Is it middle income? Is it like people in cities? Who do you see using these things?
So we've been out for a couple of years now. And so we're still sort of in the early stage. These are often enthusiasts, folks who are either looking for ways to reduce the amount of food scraps that they're putting into the landfill, so they have an environmental interest.
Yep.
But there's also a lot of our customers who are just interested in having a nicer kitchen experience, right? That they're basically interested in not having a garbage can that smells, not having to take the garbage out every night. So it's a nicer way to have your kitchen.
Yeah, for me, I get a lot of kitchen gadgets, and my wife said no more. But this is one she actually likes because it does reduce that amount of smell. If you have like a typical compost bin, after like a day or two, it starts to smell. So that's kind of one of the reasons she likes it. Are you finding people who maybe don't want to use typical composting or using the Mill because of the fact that it reduces smells?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of people who already understand the issues associated with wasting food, who understand that when it goes to a landfill, it creates methane, and they want to do something about it. But a lot of people's natural reaction to handling food scraps is a sensation of disgust. It's kind of a normal behavioral response for people. It actually is born from our behavioral immune system. We're supposed to be a little grossed out by certain things to protect ourselves. So they get stuck. And a lot of the traditional programs, they give you a plastic pail that you put on your counter to put in your kitchen to collect the food scraps. Our kitchen is a place of hygiene. It's a place of gathering, a place of cooking, and not everybody wants decaying food scraps on their counter.
So one of the things that I've read about, I think I wrote an article about it for the Spoon, is once people start using the Mill, it changes their behavior around food. I think much kind of like the Nest thermostat, which your founders had a hand in developing. Once you start using stuff like that and you quantify your usage, it starts to change your behavior because you're informing yourself of things you didn't know before. Have you seen, or can you talk about how people are changing behavior once they start seeing what they're doing with the Mill?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is really all about behavior change, right? What we're talking about is the traditional behavior in the U.S. is to take our food scraps and put it into the garbage, into the landfill. That's basically still standard in this country. So to do something different, we're talking about source separating our food scraps, which is a behavior change. We already talked a little bit about overcoming what we call the ick factor.
Yep.
But yeah, we're seeing other changes as well. Generally over the first 3 to 4 months, we see about a 20% reduction in mass additions into the Mill bin. So we actually saw this data and we're intrigued by it. What's going on? Are people unhappy with their Mill, or what's going on? Turns out the opposite is true. As we see the first 3 to 4 months, mass additions going down. Our NPS, our customer satisfaction, is actually going up. People are equally engaged. So we asked them, and they basically said, we're producing fewer food scraps at home.
They become aware of all the food they're wasting.
Yeah, it's really a form of a source reduction. They're producing less. They tell us they're cooking differently. They're more into storing food, right? They're paying attention to food storage, and they've changed their shopping habits as well.
One of the things that I also think is interesting about the Mill is you guys have been working with local cities and municipalities. Where I live, I do get curbside organic pickup, food waste pickup, or yard waste pickup, but a lot of people don't. I would imagine that it makes a lot of sense to have a Mill with a city that maybe doesn't do pickup. Can you talk about the state of that? Are you guys adding more cities? How are those programs going?
Yeah, sure. So cities are very interested, and actually it's cities that already have programs are often just as interested as the cities that don't, because one of the things that those of us who've been working in this space for a long time have come to understand is that just because we make a program available to people, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to use it, right? I mean, we've seen it's taken decades to train people. We can put a flue bin out at the curb, but it's really taken decades to train people to understand what to put in, what's recycling, what's wish cycling, etc. The same is true for these organic recycling programs. So just because we put a curb out there, it doesn't mean people are going to use the program. So we have cities that have programs and cities that don't. A lot of cities are coming in and they just want to learn for themselves. They want to get firsthand experience with mill bins. So we actually have a lot of cities coming in now and purchasing them and putting them in their own municipal buildings.
Okay.
So they're actually getting firsthand experience learning. We have a lot of cities who are interested in running pilots with us as well. So we're doing several forms of pilots. We're working in single-family residential. We're doing pilots in multifamily dwellings, etc. So yeah, a lot of interest from the cities.
I think one of the first ones was Tacoma. Are you guys still working with Tacoma?
So yes, our first official pilot was with the city of Tacoma, which was pretty amazing. Shout out to Tacoma. We started talking to them before we even physically had a device.
Okay.
This is a city that's had food scrap recycling for 10 years. Very progressive, working on this issue, but realizes some of the limitations, wanted to do more, so engaged us very early on. Yeah, and we they were our first residential pilot, very successful pilot in terms of demonstrating to the city the ability to increase participation in these types of recycling programs. So Tacoma is one of those cities that's actually interested in working with us further, so we're engaging with them right now. Yeah.
You guys grabbed a lot of headlines when you first came out because of the whole putting the scraps and then sending them in and then putting that into chicken feed, for example, to keep all these calories, all the energy that goes into producing food in the food cycle, not just throwing it away or throwing it into the ground. How is that going? Can you talk about, do most people actually send their scraps in, or most people actually just putting it into their foods, their mill scraps into food bins? What's going on with that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that's actually, I think, really important to me. As a lifelong environmentalist, I've been working on these issues for 35 years. It was important to us as a company that we didn't just sell a device, but that everybody who had a mill had an opportunity, some kind of pathway to make sure they weren't disposing of their food scraps. That's what we call the dehydrated food scraps. So we worked with the FDA to create that pathway, the first of its kind pathway for residential material to go to commercial feed. But there are lots of pathways, right? People can use this in their own gardens, they can compost it at home, they can put it in their municipal program if that program exists. But if they don't have any of those options, or they don't have backyard chickens, yes, they can return the material to us. We convert it through some basically light sorting and heat treatment into a chicken feed ingredient, and we're selling that to in the state of Washington. And I'd say, I don't have the exact number, but maybe on the order of 40% of our customers are taking advantage of that pathway.
I have thought about when I threw my coffee grounds in there, I thought, I don't want a bunch of caffeinated chickens, right? So I stopped putting my coffee grounds in.
It's okay to put your coffee grounds in.
Okay. We won't over caffeinate the chickens.
If you're a big coffee drinker and you're feeding your grounds to your backyard chickens, it may be something to worry about, but across, because so much material comes in, once it's blended, it's not a problem.
Okay. You guys recently went from Model 1 to Model 2. I've been using the Model 2. I noticed that just the orientation of the grinders are different.
Yes.
Can you talk about anything notable about going to 1 to 2? Any behavior changes, or more people buying it? Talk a little bit about that transition.
Sure. I may not be the best person to speak for this because I'm 55. This is the first company I've ever worked at. I'm not a tech or hardware guy per se. But we came in pretty fast with our first device. There was demand to get it to market. It was extremely successful. But this is the culture at Mill is one of constant improvement. So we're very focused on data. We get a lot of data coming in. Obviously, it's a connected device. So we're looking at energy usage. We're looking at jams. We're looking at all those things. And so immediately, once we had deployed the O1 bin, we were looking at how we can improve it. We came out with O2, which is an improvement on an already great device, but it does have lower energy usage. And there were some improvements on odor. The O2 device essentially is odorless. We've eliminated odors that factor in the kitchen.
Okay. That is one of if there's a criticism of the mill when I think about it, is the fact that I'm running an electric device to process food scraps. Because obviously we want to overall reduce our carbon emissions.
Yep.
If I can put less food into the waste stream, that's great. But I am spending a little bit more energy. and it sounds like you're maybe reducing the amount of energy
Yes.
with the Model 2. Are you guys constantly thinking about that? How you kind of like balance that balance?
Absolutely, we are. I have two thoughts on this. That'll be my second one. My first one is that I think it's important to context set around this question in general. When I first started working at a mill, a lot of my environmental colleagues were like, "Really, Scott, another device? Like, we need another device?" And I was like, "Yeah. Like, how many devices do you have in your kitchen? How many? You have an air fryer
Yeah.
and
Instant pot,
sous vide, and
microwave,
Instant Pot,
yeah.
and all. We have a lot of devices. It's okay to have a device for recycling. Like,
Yeah.
we can have one device in the kitchen that's designed for recycling.
Yeah.
That's actually a good thing. We don't think twice about purchasing a device or energy usage on things that are for preparing food. So I think that's something to think about. It's important context. But in terms of energy usage, again, being data driven, we have an extensive life cycle assessment. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but it's basically the tool that's used to measure the overall impact. And so we do an analysis that doesn't have a mill versus one that does have the mill, and that takes into account all the scope emissions associated with manufacturing the parts, bringing the parts to manufacture, our actual manufacture, transportation, delivery, and the energy usage associated with the device, running the device, and the emission reductions associated with diverting this material from landfill absolutely dwarf all those other emissions.
Okay. So this is your first startup. I think you had kind of an academic background, more of a policy background, I think. So what do you think? Kind of going from that into like the world of startups.
I think I don't have a lot to compare it to. I started my career as environmental advocate, as an attorney, actually, environmental attorney. I moved into policy for about 10 years, working in the nonprofit sector, advocating for these exact type of policies that are in place now, organic recycling policies, etc. And then I moved to working for the state of California. So I went from advocacy and basically pushing for strong environmental policies to administering them for the state of California. All of these places, nonprofits, public administration, have strengths and weaknesses. I think that's true of the private sector as well. But I'm taking full advantage of the strengths of the private sector right now to continue the work.
All right. Hey, well, Scott Smithline with Mill, thanks for spending time with us today.
My pleasure. Yeah, thank
Great.
you. Yeah.